Good morning, Vietnam. And here I am back again to talk about a few items that I always and have a passion about. And we're going to talk about the blue zones again. But this time, how it relates to longevity. But first, I want to say that in terms of your health, please drink at least 1 litre of clean fluids per day. And of course, start using a body moisturizer, especially on your face and your upper arms. My skin is already starting to look a bit scaly, where there used to be more muscle or fat underneath and wrinkly. This is also due to any fat that I have. And so the skin now is too much skin for the muscle underneath. And also due, of course, to my exercise habits over the last 2-3 years. And so I'm a bit thinner, I have more muscle, but the skin's starting to sag. And of course, do not add, in my opinion, any unnecessary muscle, especially over 65, because it will go away eventually in the next 5 to 10 years, and you'll have more sagging skin. But today, we're going to talk about blue zones in relation to longevity and how the particular lifestyles of longevity of the countries the blue zones are in, and what people are assuming and referring to the original reports of the blue zone areas. And I want to do some comparison of the meat consumption in those areas and other countries and related to longevity, and also talk a little bit about the 2 new countries that have been suggested as the 2 new blue zone sites. Now, I'm going to do this particular vlog a little differently. I'm going to put up my research and notes on the screen and discuss them as they're on the screen, and I'd like to see how this format works. So you can see on the video now my notes, and we will scroll down to the part where I stop talking with me on the screen. So I want to say that I have not met a more healthy vegetarian ever than myself, especially now that I'm over 70 and doing a lot more exercise in boxing and calisthenics. I still have very high mental acuity and physical abilities. 2.5 years ago, I was still designing high-rise buildings and doing concept designs for many different types of projects. The male vegetarians I've met over the last 50 years, are generally overweight, sometimes more so, almost to being obese. By looking at them, I would say that they're more than likely eating too many flour products like bread and sweetened flour products, or even just simply cakes. They all seem to have a sweet tooth. My grandmother was still very sharp and showed no signs of mental issues or cognitive decline at 85 years old. She went on to live to 95. Our bodies have changed drastically since the 1960s. The biggest change, as Dr. Thomas Seyfried points out in one of the vlogs I listened to him in extensively, is caused by our metabolic mitochondrial dysfunction. In other words, basically it means that our organs are not functioning as intended. And it appears, especially the gut, and also our metabolic rate of burning any fuel we place in our bodies. There's also a study I've mentioned before, and by a website called Analyze and Optimize. This research was done on the diet and the calorie intake of during World War II in the 50s and 60s, and the calorie intake was well over 3,000 per day, and today we're between 2,000 and 2,500 for most people. So why is it now that we cannot absorb such a high calorie intake? You can see that people were quite thin in that time, and you just have to look at the movies, and movies well into the 80s, and see what they were eating even in the movies. This vlog also postulates, without giving any proof, that our metabolism has been compromised by these reasons. Less animal fats, less butter, more pollutants everywhere, chemicals in foods, less time spent outdoors, natural light exposure, added highly processed sweeteners and oils. For example, one of the worst offenders is high fructose corn syrup, and of course stress, which is, I have added as my opinion to that list. These are all the reasons why people are talking about today, and are making us physically and mentally sick, and obese, of course. And you only have to look at the hundreds, if not thousands, of reports and data that tell us exactly these things. I notice when I've been doing my research on the blue zones that there's been quite a lot of criticism about them, and people do not think the data is correct. I think the data is, for the most part, is correct. But I think that the podcasters and the general population is missing the big picture. Why are many people in these areas living longer and are disease-free? And these are the reasons I put together and are well documented in the report on the different blue zones. First of all, they all have similar diets. The vegetarian with less than 5% with meat and or fish. They do some exercise every day. They do not live in large towns or cities. There's a strong community network within the family as well. They wake up and seem to have a purpose in their life. They live in fresh air and generally have very clean water compared to the cities around the world. And they eat also a lot of fermented foods. In Costa Rica, I am not sure what fermented foods they eat, but if they eat a lot of beans and corns, they can become fermented as well. So now I'm going to come back so you can see my my face again. I just added, which I'll show you on the when I go back to my notes, that the people that live in blue zones do not spend their lives worrying about what's on their cell phones and missing out on Facebook or any other social media app, and worrying about if they've missed a call, if they've missed a posting, or if they've missed anything, and also don't spend hours and hours and hours in front of their TVs. It seems like they had better things to do with their lives, and especially who to spend it with. So they obviously, like in the last time I was in my village in northern Greece, almost everyone does have a cell phone, but not the super old people. The last time I was there, around 10 years ago, in the central square, they have the cafes, and it used to be where the old water fountain used to be, right in the center of the square. And I actually have one of my very few memories in the village was that fountain in the middle of the square, where we used to go and get all our water because there was no running water in the homes. And also no electricity. So it was quite primitive, and but I don't have any bad memories. I mean, I was quite young. I left when I was 5. But anyway, the cafes are full of old men, all dressed in black. Very few older women come to the cafes. It's only a very modern thing. Of course, they've been going to the cafes for the last 40 years at least, but everyone has their designated cafe. Even the old guys, they go to specific cafes. There's, if I recall, 2 or 3 cafes where different older gentlemen would go nearly every day and have there generally a cup of Greek coffee and sit around and hang out with their buddies for a few hours and then go back home. And now I'll continue with my notes. You can see I just added that they do not spend their lives in front or using their cell phones and in front of TV. Now, my concerns are not so much about the details of the blue zones in terms of did they live to be 90 or 100, what percentage of the vegetables did they eat or the dairy they ate. What we do know is that they do live to a very old age. And I can attest to it simply because of where I was born. And as I just mentioned, the village I come from in the mountains of northern Greece. And from what I gather, the people in Costa Rica and Sardinia and Icaria, they also are not people who live in the lowlands. They actually live in the hills above the lowlands, and they are either goat herders, sheep herders, or they just prefer to live in the higher, cooler climates. The other thing is that disease does not seem to be a huge factor. They don't suffer from all these diseases as they get over 50, 60 and 70. So the number of life-threatening diseases is much lower, and also things like hip fractures are unheard of. Also, smaller ailments are not treated with modern organ-destroying drugs. They used to go to see the doctor when they have a serious problem. And as I've said, in my opinion, drugs are an unnatural product in our human body, and it destroys some of the organs, if not almost some part of all the organs, if they are taken continuously and you take too many of them. This is only indicative of these small communities. On a whole, when I was in Greece last, I noticed that the pharmacies were the most ubiquitous shops in the larger towns and cities. And now the same thing is happening in Vietnam, where, as I've said, I've been living here for 10 years already. The pharmacies are everywhere. So in blue zones, what is their life purpose? They have lived in these areas for their whole lives. They're either subsistent farmers, herders, and or fishermen. Why do they get up in the morning? Well, they don't go, first of all, to an office, which is air conditioning from 8 to 6 every day. And, well, working day at least. But the way they feel is they're living a meaningful life. And in so many ways, I mean, their meaning in life is not about how much money they make. It's not about how much money they save. and it's not putting away money for the future, because what they're doing every day is their life. They're working to supply the food they need, and of course most of them are on some form of social security benefits, so that complements any extra, especially food, they need to survive well into their 90s. Now recently I've noticed that there's been 2 additional areas that now people are talking about as being the new blue zones, and that is Singapore and Hong Kong. I watched a video on Hong Kong, and it's quite different to the other 5 blue zones, mainly because it's in a really big city. Now, I've been to Hong Kong, I think 3 times in the last 12 years, and I really liked it a lot. I'm very reluctant to go now with the communist crackdown, but I really enjoyed it. I may have to go again in the next few years. Do people live in their 90? Well, I think people live in their 90 almost everywhere in the world, but how many? There is no real reliable data from what I gather, and the birth certificates are either not available or they're considered inaccurate. From what I saw in the times I visited there as well, people do tend to eat out more and are part of a much larger community, in the sense that Hong Kong is not a very big area, and they're also living around the ocean there and the waterway. They also have a higher interaction with people, because you don't need an automobile to be living in Hong Kong, of course. It's just a massive headache to park it, of course. There's also a huge influx of tourists, so the people who live there are always seeing at least a lot of people around them, and they obviously walk a lot more, as I did. I loved walking around Hong Kong. They also eat much higher quality foods than in the West, generally, of course, and the foods are very spicy, and they use a lot of herbs. The Chinese cuisine can be quite spicy, and as I said, and quite tasty, as in most Southeast Asian countries. In Vietnam, we occasionally go out to restaurants, and we try to pick restaurants where we think the quality of the food is very high, and I'm occasionally very impressed. What I gather that the main contributing factors for longevity in Hong Kong are the high quality foods, as in Vietnam, people will not eat the food if they look at it and it looks old and not well prepared. They eat to about 80% satiety. They do eat quite a bit of meat. Chicken, duck are the main menus, with quite a bit of pork also. But now recently, as I will show later, they are the #1 consumers per capita of beef. And I think that's due to they've really become much more affluent in the last 10, 20 years. They drink a lot of herbal tea. Even here in Vietnam, when you visit someone, they give you a very strong cup of green tea. As I mentioned, they do a lot of walking, and they use public transport, so they're out a lot in the fresh air, and again, they continuously are interacting and seeing people when they go out. Again, I mentioned they live by the ocean, and compared to inner city life, the Loma Linda is the only place of the 5 blue zones that it appears to be the furthest away from an ocean. They have strong religious beliefs, but not to the extent that Western culture has, like Catholicism and being a Protestant. They don't go to church every day, or at least once a week. They do not do that. My girlfriend visits a Buddhist temple occasionally. She helps cleaning up. Sometimes she may help cook at the temples. And they give small donations of money, like all religions, and they give thanks to life and pray to Buddha to give them a lucky life. The Asian communities, countries, have very strong community and family groups. In Vietnam, 3 weeks ago, we had the Tet holidays, the spring holidays, and basically almost the country shuts down and people really take time off and go back to their hometowns and spend as much time as they can with their families. They seem to control stress much better than in the West. Only Loma Linda is the English-speaking area that is considered a blue zone, and they also control the stress in their lives extremely well. Being Seventh-day Adventists, they do spend a lot of time in their church. Even though in Asia you have a very strong work ethic and they spend long hours in the office, it does not appear to affect their longevity that much. They also, as in Vietnam, I'm assuming, I'm only correlating it with my life, 10 years in Vietnam, is that they don't complain about the smaller problems in life. And they seem to enjoy much more living in the present today, and spend time with their friends in coffee shops and dinner much more regularly than in the West. So here I am back on the screen with you. The next part I will just mention that I want to talk briefly now about Singapore. There are a lot of similarities between Singapore and Hong Kong. They're both, their race is Chinese, of course, and Singapore is my first job here in Vietnam, short term as it was with a Singaporean architectural firm as a project director for some high-rise buildings. And they work really long hours, and the work there is extremely competitive. And of course, from what I read every day, China, Japan, and now India, of course, South Korea, are also extremely competitive in their working environments. But about Singapore, people also are forced to use public transport or walk a lot more, because automobiles are like super expensive in Singapore. A cost of a Toyota Camry is $200,000 US. In Malaysia and in Vietnam, the cost is closer to $50,000 or even less for the basic models. This high cost, the government has put these super high taxes on all vehicles, well, at least non-commercial vehicles, as far as I know. And it's probably because they want to keep congestion to a minimum on the roads. They want to promote public transport, They want to make it more of a egalitarian society. There's, of course, less pollution. There are less road fatalities and accidents. And it forces people to interact with the community and the society at large by being outdoors and sharing at least public transport together. Of course, there's then a lot less drinking and driving, and it doesn't create all the stress and the mental health problems that sitting alone in an automobile for an hour or two can give you, or you can get. And of course, it eliminates road rage. So there you go. So we're back on the screen. This is what I just spoke about. I wanted to bring it up so you can see all my notes on this topic or this video. And now I put together a couple of tables. The first one is the list of countries' longevity, the top 10 countries, and then a few others on the bottom of the top 10. The one on the left is by the web page Worldometers, and is you can see it there on the screen. And the one on the right is by a company, Statista, in 2022. The one on the left is done in 2023, and the web page for Statista is on the bottom there. I looked at another web page, and the results are similar, but not. None of them are the same. The biggest difference I see here is the listing. You can see on the left, Hong Kong, is first and Macau second. And the one on the right, Monaco is first. On the list on the left, Monaco is not in the list of countries. And the one on the right, Singapore and Hong Kong, are not on the list of the countries on longevity in Statista. But it's not critical, but you can see that I'm just pointing out a couple of countries here. Australia, which is, to me, an anomaly, because their diet, as I grew up there from age 5 to 28, their diet is not so good, and I'll talk about that in a little while. Now, the 5 blue zones, one is in Italy. You can see Italy on the left, 84, on the right, 83 years old. Greece, 82 on the left, 81 on the right. Costa Rica on the left is 80 years old. Japan on the left is 85, on the right is 84.5. So you can see as they relate, on the Costa Rica is 80 on the left and 81 on the right. So you can see the blue zones correlating to those countries all have longevity greater than 80 years anyway. So it's highly likely that the blue zone, the people who live in blue zones live into their 90s. If you live almost the average of those countries where the blue zones are, you're well in your 80s already. So the data, at least on longevity, I think is correct. In regard to their diets, I think it's generally correct as well. As if you saw my previous blue zone video, comparing that to my hometown, my village where I was born, and my current diet, which is strongly based on the food I grew up with, except for the edition of tofu. So, I've written down countries like Argentina and USA, which I'll bring up now in regard to the meat consumption in a short time. So my next heading is, so then how do you get to live a Blue Zones lifestyle? Well, some of these are what has happened to me in my life, because I consider myself a Blue Zone guy. You don't buy anything you don't need today or tomorrow. The internet, and also years ago before the internet became big, it always amazed me how much advertising there was for all these different products, because I never bought anything that was advertised. If I needed a pair of jeans, I'd go to a good store, a small store, or even a larger store, and go and look at what the blue jeans are advertised. I mean, everyone knew about, for example, Levi's to start with, and the Gap became huge in the 80s. So there were plenty of stores to go and buy things that you didn't need advertising to tell you. Automobiles is a huge advertised product. You know, I just bought the cars I liked. I mean, they're all second-hand. I've never owned a new car, or my current vehicle is a Chevrolet Colorado truck that was 4 years old when I bought it. I buy what I like. As you can see on the screen, if I want a fry pan, I go to the local store and check out all the fry pans. If I don't see the one I like, I just go to another store. My first two iPhones were iPhone 3s, and they were new. After that, I only bought second-hand iPhones. I couldn't see the point of spending all that money. My current phone is an iPhone 12 mini, and my last boss bought it for me because he hated looking at me using my old iPhone 6. Second item I've written down is, you should not be worrying about things you cannot change. You have to only worry about today, and only the things you can change today, and start planning for your future and things, and how to get what you want out of life in the future. On personal success, you can only do one step at a time. You can't, unless you win a lottery. You have to plan. There are hundreds of videos on how to secure your future, how to secure your retirement, especially how to have enough money in retirement. And of course, the sooner you start saving and investing properly, the higher the chance you'll have enough money to retire. Of course, Western cultures and societies and countries are just making it harder and harder. I remember when my parents bought our house in Australia, after 6 years after arriving in Australia. We bought a house, and the house was just over 5,000 Australian dollars at the time. It took us, my parents, at least my father died before the 30 years were up, but my mother paid it off, and she was still paying around $35 a month for the mortgage, but it finally got paid off. If you're going to change your diet, one step at a time. Do the simple things. There's plenty of information on the internet. Reduce your saturated fat intake. Eat more vegetables. Use high quality oils to cook in and put on salads. Or start eating one piece of fruit a day. I tend to be a cold turkey person. I go all in or nothing. So, gurus on the internet. Even before the internet, there was people like Tony Robbins. These guys are not going to change your life. They are specifically tailored to generally people with a lot of money. Generally people who already have that mindset. When I listened to these guys, I completely turned off because I could never do anything they say. It's not me. It's not, in my opinion, 99% of the population. Because we have to deal with the reality of life, our income, and the jobs we have. Guys, these gurus, they talk like you can change overnight. You can do and become whoever you want to become. Well, I'm sorry, we cannot. 99% of us just have to struggle through life and take one step at a time. So, most of this is, as I just said, pure modern Western rubbish. We all know this, but we need the confirmation of it. These guys are doing it now on the internet. They do it for more subscriptions, they do it for more clicks, they do it for more likes, and to say is something they are promoting. My initial podcast, The Good and the Bad and the Ugly of Moving to Vietnam, is all about my personal experience. There are also thousands of diet gurus. I suggest you pick a diet that makes you feel the most comfortable and you believe in it. It's not going to be lose weight fast. Eat more meat to lose weight. Do this exercise to lose weight. If they're advertising like this, they're not for you. They're not going to work. You have to do your research and make decisions based on what you can do, what you can manage, and hopefully you will get to where you want to be in the future. Yes, the carnivore diet will help you lose an enormous amount of weight. But one of the reasons is because you switch from a partial protein carbohydrate diet to almost a pure carnivore diet. But I don't believe it's a really healthy choice. One blogger I listened to the other day stated, you cannot lose weight being on a restricted carbo intake. Then when you go back to your normal food intake, you put weight back on and sometimes more. What an idiot. Why go on this type of diet in the first place? It's like New Year resolutions. They don't work. Pick a diet that you believe will work for you. And it's one step at a time. Look at yourself in the mirror. I mean, if you're overweight and you're eating McDonald's, well, you're not going to lose weight no matter what. Don't eat highly processed foods. No sugars. Replace all this stuff with healthy carbohydrates and proteins. McDonald's has a 40% sugar content on their general hamburger. There are huge risks involved with carnivore diets. Hundreds, maybe thousands of published articles of why a vegetarian diet or a low carnivore diet is much more healthy for you. You get sick less, you develop less diseases, and you live longer. Now, I can see there are people who do need more meat than I would recommend. And it's specifically for people who need a high protein intake, and of course people who need higher doses of vitamins B1, B2, B3, B6 and B12, plus other nutrients you can only get in meat proteins. But these people go crazy. Some of these people go crazy on these carnivore diets. They only eat red meat, no vegetables or fruit. God forbid what their insides are going to look like in 5 to 10 years. And now I've, excuse me, I put together, I've indicated 2 websites that you may be interested in if you want to do more research yourselves. One is on Loma Linda and the other one is on Hong Kong health issues. The one on the blue zone, Loma Linda, has to do with the healthcare issues that they have and how they have actually their own hospital that they've built there, and a private hospital that they built and is available to anyone who wants to go visit. The second one is a website on the Hong Kong meat and dairy consumption on the rise despite UN warnings. And this is very interesting, and also a third web page from World Population Review on the rankings of which countries are eating the highest meat consumption per population. I'm going to show that on the screen in a minute, but my notes: it has been considered for all peoples from rural, poor or new first world countries a sign of affluence if you eat especially red meat. I watch a lot of Korean movies and dramas, and when they want to celebrate, they're always saying, wow, let's get some beef. Let's get some Korean beef, which must be frightfully expensive. When we first moved to Australia, it was the same thing. You know, from our mountain village, which we were basically 90% vegetarian, we went from a 90% vegetarian protein diet to a 50% meat protein diet. And I'm basing this on our meal consumption per week for dinner. So I'm going to switch to my notes now. So as I mentioned, these are the 2 web pages I discussed, the 2 reports. The first one on Loma Linda, the second one on the UN warnings on the increase of meat and dairy consumption in Hong Kong. And now we have this excerpt on meat consumption by country in 2024. And as you can see, basically that 10,000 BC onwards, meat was a big part of the human diet, and with its high fat and protein, has contributed to the lengthening of human lifespans and intellectual development in prehistoric eras. But from my research, there's a limit on how far that goes without starting to have intake of vegetables and fruits. So here's a list of the different types of meats that are eaten in different parts of the world. And this is a table I collated from that research paper on meat consumption. You can see that I've listed about 20 countries, and you can see that at the top, Hong Kong has now become the biggest meat consumption in the world at 136 kilograms per year. And from the Worldometers research, they claiming that Hong Kong has the longest longevity. I find that hard to believe, and also Macau. I think both those countries are much more associated or closely aligned with Taiwan, as you can see here at number 20, on their meat consumption of 87 kilograms per metre per year, and they're ranked 36 in longevity at 81.5 years. I think that's a much closer indication of where Hong Kong and Macau are at in terms of longevity. I find it hard to believe that they are ranked first and second in the Worldometers table, and they're not even ranked in the Statista rankings of longevity, as I showed earlier. USA is the second highest country for meat consumption, but my belief on that is, and living there for 33 years, is that I think in America that, and here are my notes on this, I read 15 years ago, roughly, that one of the main reasons that health insurance is so high in the US is the treatment of geriatric patients, keeping them alive using drugs and hospital stays well beyond their natural time. In the UK, they've addressed this much more stringently, and they do it on a cost-effective time analysis on who gets what treatment when and how much is it going to cost, and so therefore they give you a ranking of some sort. So I believe the US longevity data is even lower. You can see that in this, they are ranked 47th in the rankings of longevity and only at 78 years old. So you lose about 8 years, roughly 10% of your life, if you live in America and you eat the average consumption of meat. Now, I put an asterisk next to USA, Mongolia, Argentina, Nauru, and Brazil. They are high meat-consuming countries. You can see in Mongolia, it's ranked 141st at 71 years. Argentina, 110th. Their consumption of meat is 110 kilograms per year, and they're ranked 64th, and their longevity is 78 years. Nauru, they eat 105 kilograms per year of meat. They're ranked 169th at 64 years. But I looked it up specifically, and Nauru eats a lot of junk food, classic American junk food. And that's the reason why their longevity is so low. Brazil is another country with quite a high meat intake. They're ranked 82nd, and their longevity is 76. So they're losing about 10 years compared to the highest longevity countries. The standout one that's not explainable to me from everything I've read is Australia. They do have a very high meat intake, as I mentioned. My family's meat intake changed enormously when we moved to Australia. They are ranked 10 in longevity at 83.7. And in fact, the first 10 countries are all over 80 years old for longevity. I think that's going to drop in the future. I also looked up their diets today, as I have not lived in Australia for 40 years, permanently at least. And I think that the figure is going to drop significantly in the next 10 to 20 years. As we go down the list on this meat consumption, when you start looking at the countries on the in the blue zone, you can see that Greece only consumes 75 kilograms. They're 34th ranking, but 82 years old, longevity. Costa Rica, 58. They're ranked 43rd with 80 years. Japan is ranked 84th in meat consumption at 53 kilograms per year, and they're ranked 3rd in the world for longevity at 85 years old. Italy, 70 kilograms per year of meat consumption, ranked 6th for longevity, 84.2. So you can see Italy, all the areas of the blue zones, the countries they are in, do not consume a lot of meat. They are ranked very high on the ranking of longevity and all over 80 years old. So again, the data from the blue zone suggests to me again that it is quite accurate. Now, finally, I put a list together of some very bad podcasters. I'm talking just about health and diet and longevity, and also some excellent podcasters and some moderate podcasters. I'll talk more about the really bad ones. Dr. Andrew Huberman, he's a neuroscientist, but he's a pro-supplement guy. As I've said before, I do not believe in supplements unless you are really sick. Gone to a doctor and they've done many tests and determined whatever you're deficient in, you should be taking extra. But if you're eating a healthy diet, you absolutely do not need any supplements, as totally indicated by the blue zone areas, the blue zone diets, and even the countries that the blue zones are in. One of his podcasts is called The Science of Making and Breaking Habits. I mean, come on. Why? That's like our New Year resolutions. It's just who we are as humans. We want to believe we're going to lose 10 kilograms or change our diets tomorrow. We might do it for a day, a week, or a month, and then we just fall back into our old habits. It's just normal, Huberman. Next guy, Dr. Peter Attia. He's a doctor, physician, a medical doctor. He states the obvious most of the time. One of his podcasts, How to Sustainably Lose Fat While Maintaining Muscle. Exercise, stupid. I'm going to talk about him when I talk about mental health again. But his 5 main items on how to live longer is drug hormone supplements, nutrition, of course, physical activity, sleep well, and of course emotional and cognitive mental health. Other than the first one, the next 4, I think everybody knows that. Dr. Mike, a family doctor. I've done 3 podcasts on him. I think he is close to the biggest charlatan on the internet. Here's a list of a few of the titles of his podcasts. 3 Months to Live, Worst Medical Horror Stories, Bad Doctors Caught on Camera, Shocking Medical Conditions on TikTok, Mysterious Deaths Doctors Can't Explain, How Health Gurus Trick You. Well, sounds like you. So they're all just sensational headings in the end. I mean, it's just like the reality TV shows for me. Another guy, Dr. Aria Campbell. I'd throw him in there. I'll probably talk about also in my mental illness podcast I will do in the future. Why partners cheat. God only knows. Another guy, Thomas DeLauer. He's a nutritionist and a business performance coach. But he gives all these advice on so many topics. One of them, study finds another reason walking is king of fat loss. Shit. Anyone could have told you that. Dr. Ken Barry, who I've mentioned in an earlier podcast on exercise. Proper human diet. That's he's one of the practitioners of this type of diet. One of his podcasts is called Raise Good Cholesterol with This Coffee Hack. Barry, who cares? And of course, Dr. Stephen Gundry, who's also mentioned in my Dr. Mike podcast because he had a discussion with him. He's a cardiac surgeon, made a lot of money on podcasts and his books. One of the things he said is, oh, I really love extra virgin olive oil. Shit, Gundry. Olive oil's been used in cooking for at least 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years. He's such a sensationalist, and everything he says, one of his podcasts, or one of the things he has said is, I can end all disease. Well, if you could, why are so many people sick? Tom Bilyeu, he has a company called Quest Nutrition. Basically, he sells you vitamins and drugs. One of his headings, the trans debate is easy to solve. I don't know where they get off thinking they are the saviors of humanity. Another guy, Dr. Anthony Shafee. He's considered the #1 brain doctor. The worst thing that feeds dementia. Another thing he says, you won't believe how old she is, on one of his podcasts. Another one, seed oils and plant toxins causing brain disease. We've been eating plants for 100,000 years, doctor, and making oil from seeds for thousands of years. The really great podcasters, Dr. Daniel Lieberman, Dr. Jason Fung, Dr. Thomas Seyfried, Felix Harder, who's just a nutrition and exercise expert, seems to be really good. And of course the excellent Dr. Gil Carvalho. He has his podcast, I forget the name of it, but he discusses a lot of research papers on health, and I've listened to a number of his podcasts. The more moderate podcasters, Dr. Tara Swart, Gilles Yeo, Michael Easter, Dr. Daniel Arman, and some of the young lady in 5 Minute Body, even though she's far too pro-meat. Anyway, that was the end of my notes on Blue Zone and longevity. As you can see from all my notes, of course, you have them as reference if you wanted to check where I get my data from and do your own research. There's a lot more papers and data and research that you can look into if you like. But I believe that the Blue Zone, the information is at least 90% correct on everything the original researcher, or Mr. Belcher, was it, that produced the papers on the 5 Blue Zone areas. I hope this hasn't been too long. It appears that I'm going to combine all the videos and that I've made, going back and forth. and I hope you really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed researching it, and it's just proven what I know intrinsically about health, diet, exercise, mental stress. So take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.